YouTube? Welcome back to the Allegheny Northern in N scale, and today we're going to go over the Communities tab poll on graffiti. And so I'm assuming you guys all knew this was coming because usually when I post a poll online, at some point in time, we're going to do a video to discuss it. So today it was a very simple question, and it was, do you do graffiti? And I had a funny feeling we were going to get some interesting results on this because there's mixed opinions on graffiti. And we're going to talk about that just because, well, why not have a little controversy for a Saturday morning, right? But in any event, let's take a look at what we are, what we're doing here. So as far as what we're trying to accomplish. So for the poll, there were the standard 5 options, and the fifth one was the goofy one, but it had a purpose this time. So the first option was, yes, totally custom jobs because I'm a bad boy at heart. So that means you are either painting or drawing your graffiti on your model, whether it's a box car, rolling stock, or whether it's a building or retaining wall, whatever it is, you are doing a custom job. So you're actually applying your skill set into making custom graffiti, whether it's from a picture, so you're mimicking an exact model, or whether it's just something in your head and you're doing it on your model, hopefully rather than in public, but whatever, that's fine. So you're doing a custom job that only you have on your models. All right, now the next one was, yeah, but only decals because I don't want to waste time. So this is for the folks, yes, you want that look, you want that gritty city look, but you're not really interested in taking the time to make it match a prototype or to come up with your own artwork. You're doing it on your own. So you're just grabbing the decals, you're going to go ahead, cut it out, glue it on, you're set and ready to go. The next one was, no, I don't want to encourage hoodlum behavior. And so that one is, you're just simply opposed to graffiti. The idea of graffiti upsets you, so therefore you're not going to incorporate it onto your model railroad. Fourth option was, I don't have time. It was a skill or patience for custom tags. So, okay, so maybe you would do it if you thought your skill set was up to par and you could accomplish it convincingly. And so for those of you who are in that group, I'm just going to take a moment to talk to you because not only does this apply to graffiti, but it's going to apply to other aspects of the hobby. And so if you're afraid to do something so you don't do it, then you're never going to get better at it. And so I would not go out and grab a $50 scale trains car and try on that, but I would definitely recommend that you go to a hobby shop or you go to a swap meet or a train show, and you can usually find some very old cars that really aren't good for anything other than practicing on and practice. And you can try different techniques. It's a great way to do your weathering. It's a great way to do graffiti. It's even a great way to experiment with changing couplers or weighting cars. You're doing something to a model that if you screw it up, you don't really care. And realistically, if you do a bunch of graffiti or you try a bunch of techniques, and at the end of the day, you go, okay, I can do this on a real model, or at the end of the day, you go, okay, I don't like this. You can always prime that car again and paint it another color and then try the technique all over again. So you can almost get yourself a couple of cars, maybe represent a hopper car and a box car or tank car, and then you can continue to use them over and over again as long as you keep priming and repainting, because you don't necessarily need all the decals and stuff that goes on there, because you're just practicing a technique. So that would be my recommendation to the folks that were in that group. And then there was the last one that was, look, I'm just thrilled to complete a model. Y'all go too hard. And that was kind of the funny option, but it has a purpose. So let's talk about the percentages there. So yes, when you look at it, roughly 32% of modelers that are viewing this channel, or who at least took the poll, are taking the time to do graffiti. And that's a really low number. I expected it to be a low number. I actually expected it to be a little bit lower because it doesn't seem like a lot of railroads, at least a lot of model railroads, have graffiti on it. So let's dive into it a little bit as to why you should or shouldn't, and sort of get into what graffiti is, especially in a modern railroad. Okay, so let's talk about graffiti itself, and this is probably where I'm going to say the controversy of this video will come in, and just because you're going to have a lot of folks on here that are going to tell you that graffiti is art, and believe that or not believe that. Most art does not affect somebody else. So, and what I mean by that is, if I paint a picture and show it to somebody, they may have an emotional response to it, but it when the painting goes away, it doesn't affect them, right? When you do graffiti, you're doing graffiti on property that most likely is not yours, and it is, in a sense, damaging a surface. So if it's a business, um, whether that business is open or closed, and you're doing graffiti on it, then you are marking a surface that you don't have any right to. Okay, so if it's an active business and they've got to come in there and they've got to clean that off, you are incurred. There's an expense incurred there, and the person who did it is long since gone and not responsible for the damage. Regardless of that, is there an artistic element to it? Sure. I mean, you're creating something out of a medium. So I guess in the pure simplest form, it's art. But you're also doing damage. So it's vandalism, first and foremost, and everything else. And I'm not going to encourage people to take up that sort of an art. Now, if they were doing tags, but they were doing it on a canvas, and then that tag became popular, that would, to me, make more of an art form than vandalism, because now you're showing off the skill that you have with your spray paints, but you're not putting them on somebody else's property. Talking about the deliberate act of damaging property. So whether that property is a boxcar, you don't own the boxcar. Whether that property is a building, a retaining wall, a fence, whatever it is, it's vandalism, and it's a crime. And most cities have an ordinance against it, and there's varying penalties. And it's not the worst crime you can commit, obviously, but it's still something that you are putting a burden on somebody else. So that's where I come down on graffiti. Whether or not you should model that behavior. So there was a few folks that actually put a really good comment, something that I hadn't considered it, and that is they model a era where graffiti was not present, or graffiti was minimally present. So they have it minimally on the railroad. And so if you are modeling one of those ages where we were, let's say, a proper society and we weren't damaging other people's property, then yes, that's a great reason for you not to have graffiti on your wall. So if you're modeling back in the steam era and everything, where people were proper society, and kids were raised and watched, and basically we were a little more together, I think then that would be appropriate, that you would not have graffiti on your steam locomotives, let's say. But in today's modern society, and with the degradation of culture and whatnot, we do have a much more prevalent crime scene. And once again, even though it's not a major crime, it is still a crime, and it's part of what we do. And so if you are modeling a modern railroad and you don't have graffiti on your buildings, on your rolling stock, on your retaining walls, it's not going to have that real city vibe, because that has become part of the city landscape. And so I don't think you're necessarily encouraging it by adding it to your layout. You're simply modeling the world as you see it, and that's what we're really striving to do, right? So we are really striving to model the world as it exists. And if you are somebody who's looking more for a utopia model, then your model will always look more train set like and not as realistic. Because if you're going through a modern city and you're in a very urban setting, you are going to see graffiti. If you're modeling a more rural area, you're not going to see graffiti. One, there's not as many surfaces to do that on, and two, it's just not as prevalent because you tag one farmer's barn and they're pretty much going to know who did it because it's a small town and there's not too many people floating around, so they can kind of figure out real quick who the troublemakers in town are. But when you're in the urban setting, so to speak, there's a lot of people, some of them are transient, and it's just there's a lot more ambiguity for that. So while we don't have to necessarily agree with graffiti, and we certainly don't have to condone graffiti, if we are trying to create a realistic model of the world in which we actually live in, I don't see how you can do that without without adding graffiti to some of your rolling stock, to some of your buildings, retaining walls. It is an integral part of what society has become. And, for those of you who don't want to encourage hoodlum behavior, I totally understand it. I totally get it. I'm with you, and I appreciate that. But it is not what our society has become, unfortunately. But you really need to research the area in which you're modeling, because that is going to sort of tell you what your graffiti is. And what I mean by that is, we all know that California, for instance, has sort of become lawless in its bigger cities. And I mean, you just have to turn on the news, and I'm sure that folks that aren't even from the U.S. watching this probably see what's going on in California, and it's kind of a mess, and it's kind of a shame because it's got some very beautiful cities and it's got some very beautiful areas that just I wouldn't go to right now. But um, you've got to capture that, and so you're going to have heavily graffitied locomotives. You're going to have heavily graffitied cars. You can even model some cars that have been broken into sitting on your sidings, and that would really capture the feel of those areas. And if you're modeling other large cities, you're going to have similar graffiti. But conversely, if you're modeling more rural areas, you're not going to have that same level of graffiti. You might have some, but it's not going to be nearly as pronounced. But it's the degradation of society is everywhere. It doesn't just affect the inner city; it affects pretty much everywhere. So, you need to include that. And obviously, now, there's a couple of different things here that we need to consider, and that is the age of the car. If you're modeling a new car that's not weathered a lot, then there might not be a tag on it yet. If you are modeling an era where there wasn't graffiti, then you may not have graffiti on your car. And it's important to not overdo it, right? Like, there's a certain box cars, for instance, because that's what we're using here. They're big, and so if you're standing on ground level and this thing's on a siding, or wherever it is in an industry, unless you can get up on the loading dock, there's going to be a limit to what you can actually reach, right? So I don't think too many graffiti people doing graffiti. I'm not going to call them artists. I don't want to give them that kind of credit, but they're not carrying ladders necessarily with them, right? This is a quick get in, tag it, and get out. So we can add. I guess we can add trespassing to the crimes you're committing, other than defacing property. But they are going to have to be lower where they can reach it. So if you're putting your graffiti up here, there better be a reason for that, and it better not be because I dropped the decal and that's where it's stuck. So kind of see where graffiti happens. You're not going to see it a whole lot on the ends of cars, right? Because it's a smaller surface, and if the cars are coupled, then there's not a whole lot of work, room to get in between there. So the tags in here might be smaller, and you might be able to do that with a pen or a marker. But and the other thing is too, depending on where you are, you're not going to see tags necessarily on both sides, or on both sides of the door or wherever. So you don't have to completely coat your car in graffiti. And so when you're picking your decals, if that's what you're doing, or whether you're doing it by hand, then select a size that is appropriate for one, the car, two, the location, and three, the area. So location on the car, area that you're modeling, and of course, you just need to realize that this is gonna be a thing. So let's talk about what I'm doing here on the Allegheny Northern. So I have a couple of areas that are quote unquote seedy areas. They are urban areas. That's where my switching occurs. And so in those areas, I want to give them that down to earth gritty feel. I want them to feel like they are lived in, abused cities. And that's typically where you're going to see railroads, because that's where the industry is. Okay. I'm not going to go overboard with it, and I am going to be adding decals to my rolling stock as I go, just because it's part of what needs to be modeled. I'm going to start adding. My layout looks very clean. It's not as clean as some of the layouts that I follow on YouTube, where it looks like you guys, built a utopia. The grass is very green. The streets are very black and or gray, just so they look like either new concrete or new asphalt. The buildings are pristine and they look toyish because you haven't taken the time to go back and weather it. Now, I'm guilty of this. Weathering is something that I do as an after effect. Usually I get a new model, goes right on the layout. I build a new kit. It gets a little bit of weathering, it goes right on the layout. So I tend to go back through areas and blend the scenery better and add the street signs, the graffiti, the weathering. I tend to do that after the fact. So as you see my videos, you'll notice that certain cars are weathered, certain cars are not. Some locomotives have some weathering, most locomotives don't. I'm slowly going back and I'm adding all of that to varying degrees so that I have a mix of stuff that's weathered, stuff that's not weathered, stuff that's been tagged, stuff that hasn't been tagged. So I model a modern era, and it's something that you need to include as part of your modern era. So that's where I come down on graffiti. And so for those of you who are not doing it, who are modeling an age that doesn't have it, then I guess you guys are off the hook. For those of you who are modeling a modern age, anything probably 90s and forward, maybe a little bit into the 80s and forward, you need to start looking at, be late 80s, I guess. You need to start looking at where your tags are. You need to start looking at your cities and, your areas where that would be prevalent, and you need to start adding it to get that full effect. Put it in as part of your weathering technique. It doesn't matter whether you use some decals to represent it or whether you go hard and you decide I'm going to perfectly mimic this car, or maybe you're going to make it an actual art form and you're going to draw it yourself from your own idea, so that if you were a vandal, this is what you would do. And that's cool because you're making it the art form that it should be on something that is not somebody else's property. So, and you're not trespassing on your own boxcar. So that's good. But anyway, so that is how the poll shook out. That is where I am on graffiti. So you are going to see more and more graffiti making its way onto the layout and onto various pieces of rolling stock. And so for this boxcar, it's getting this one single tag. It's weathered on both sides, obviously, but that is all it's going to get, because and any more, and it's going to start getting a little bit much. Now, if you really want to get real creative with this, you can put the decal somewhere and then actually come in and paint over that decal when it's dry and re-put on reporting marks or anything like that, so that you actually get a like we're repairing this car kind of feel, which is kind of cool. So just take a look at that stuff. It's It adds a real nice effect to your layout, makes it look very modern, very realistic.